I've made so many mistakes, y'all, trying to grow food for the first time. I got to get my laptop to refer to them. That is just how many things I have done incorrectly. Mistake number one, not building my raised garden beds way before the growing season. I went back and forth about what I actually wanted to grow my food in. I knew I didn't want to grow it in a wood bed. I knew I didn't want to have a bunch of pots laying everywhere. So I said, oh, maybe I can grow these in raised garden beds. The only thing I didn't realize is that this was going to take a long time, especially by myself. I have two raised garden beds. They're both 8 by 4 by 2. It took me so long to put the first one together. Like it was actually quite a lot of work. And it's so funny because by the time I actually got to the end of putting the bed together, I looked at the manual and there was this little disclaimer that said professional installation recommended. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's funny because I could have used that information. I had to use like all manner of things to prop up the bed because you really do need two people. If I had to do it again, I would have definitely phoned a friend, definitely paid somebody to put it together. If it's going to be a big raised bed, I would recommend putting that thing together sooner rather than later, actually. Mistake number two, not mixing perlite into my soil the same day that I put the soil in my garden bed. Perlite is something that makes sure that your soil has enough oxygen in the top few layers. This is going to make sure that your plants actually have oxygen around the roots. It really does need that because when the soil becomes compacted, it's harder for the roots to pull the nutrients out of the soil. The fallout from this mistake is that I had to go back to my garden beds, work the perlite in into this really hard, dry, caked up soil and struggle with this garden fork trying to move the soil around and mix the perlite in. It was just really difficult because the soil had no give, y'all. If you're gonna go ahead and fill a garden bed with soil, or if you're doing any type of large project where you know there's gonna be a lot of soil, please, please, please put the perlite in first. Your back will thank you, your arms will thank you, your knees will thank you. There is nothing more tiring, more soul crushing than trying to rake through compacted dirt. Mistake number three, not buying sweet potato slips as soon as I needed them. This is kind of a wild card and it may not apply to you if you never want to grow sweet potatoes, but if you do want to grow sweet potatoes, just be aware that sometimes they're not available in nurseries all throughout the season. I want to say around March 20th, I was like, okay, I might be ready to start planting. Let me go and get some sweet potato slips because sweet potatoes don't actually grow that well from seed. You need something called slips. And it kind of looks like a thin cylinder slice of sweet potato that you just put into the ground and it's supposed to grow more sweet potatoes. And so I wanted to go get these to put in my raised garden beds. And I'm calling around everywhere, literally every nursery in DFW. And they're like, we do not have that. And come to find out, they had it earlier in the season, but I guess I was just late. Honestly, y'all, I had given up after I called around to all these different places. Now, my girlfriend, she helped me out. She got online and she found a place that will actually ship sweet potato slips. So I was super grateful, super surprised, and honestly just happy and waiting to get these sweet potato slips because I'm like, okay, yes, I can finally grow these things. Y'all, the sweet potato slips arrived, someone stole them. I just had to I just had to come to the conclusion that the universe doesn't want me to grow sweet potatoes right now, and that's okay. You know, I ain't mad at it. I ain't gonna fight it. I'll grow sweet potatoes one day, but if you want to grow them, just know that you may have to look for them a little bit earlier rather than later. I would recommend, if you can, calling ahead maybe in February to some of your nurseries and just ask them when they get sweet potatoes in, just to make sure that you're not blindsided and you can start planting whenever you want to plant. Mistake number four, watering too aggressively. I don't know why I was doing this, but for some reason I turned the sprayer up on like maximum and was watering the garden bed so aggressively. It didn't take all of that. I don't know why I was doing it. But the result is that a lot of the seeds shifted around that I had planted. And if y'all know, if you read the back of seed packets, there's actually a depth that you're supposed to plant specific seeds at. And so, me watering so aggressively, I mean, just attacking the soil for no reason. I wish what I would have focused on is just getting the top 2 inches of soil moist just to kind of cover the seeds, cover the soil around it a little bit below it so that it has enough water, light, and heat to actually germinate. Mistake number 5 is not buying soaker hoses immediately. So, where I went wrong is I planted my crops, but what I really should have done right after I planted is bought a soaker hose, installed it, and then just let that do the watering for me. The crazy thing is, even in the spring where I live, it's still kind of hot. Like it's going between hot and cold, but when it's hot, and when it's cold, it's 50, right? Which is not ideal for the plants, but when it comes to watering, you just want to keep the soil moist. You don't want to let it dry out. So I have been watering by hand ever since I planted. And what I discovered is that I could water in the morning, say like 10 a.m., and by 5 p.m., the soil would be like cracked and dry again. So, what really would have saved me is if I had have just installed soaker hoses immediately so that I could really water slowly and gently, like I just mentioned in the previous mistake, and not have to worry about whether I'm watering too aggressively or if I'm not watering enough. I can literally just set a timer for like 30, 45 minutes and let that water just penetrate the soil deeply for a long time, and I'm good to go. I would definitely recommend letting these systems work for you. Get yourself some type of drip irrigation system or a soaker hose and just save yourself the worry of having to water by hand because it takes a long time. Mistake number 6 is paying too much attention to general gardening advice versus just listening to the weather patterns around me and using that to guide my decisions. What I should have been thinking about is what is the temperature of my soil right now? Is it consistently 60 degrees, 65 degrees, 70 degrees? And what temperature do I need my soil to be to actually germinate and start sprouting? We had a cold snap. It pretty much wiped out all of my plants. I think the only plant that actually survived was my watermelon plant, which is surprising, but it was still sad because I planted so many things, y'all. Like, I planted sweet peppers, corn, green beans, oregano, thyme, lavender, basil. I mean, just so much. And to only have watermelon survive because I wasn't paying attention to the weather. I was growing a lot of things that are pretty sensitive to the temperature. So the corn and the green beans, they need the soil to be really hot. Watermelon needs the soil to be really hot. Um, and a host of other things. So if you don't get anything else from this video, if this is the only thing you take away, I would just say pay attention to the weather patterns around you. And it's not that you'll be able to predict the weather, of course. I mean, I didn't know a cold snap was coming, but if you've lived in your region for a while and you know the weather is kind of back and forth, just go ahead and wait a couple of extra weeks, even if it's already been 2 weeks after the last frost date. If you don't feel confident that the weather is going to stay at a consistent temperature or even a consistent climate over the next few weeks, then I would definitely say just wait. Mistake number 7 is not putting tomato seedlings in their own pot or container versus putting them directly into my raised garden beds. Now, why do I say that? Well, it actually ties into mistake number 6, which is when the weather is uncontrollable and you have a plant that is very sensitive to overwatering or cold snaps, you really kind of want to keep that plant separate until you're sure of the weather. And so I didn't do that. I wasn't even thinking of it. I just went to the nursery, got some tomato starts, and immediately put them in my garden bed. Just not thinking that, okay, this is going to be their final growing place, their final resting place to start growing and evolving. And if the weather goes south on me, I can't just take these things out of the ground and try to protect them. And so what I wish I would have done is just kept the tomato seedlings in their original containers. That way, if the weather got too cold or if it started raining too much, which is pretty much what happened, I could just bring the plants inside, and and that would have saved me so much time, y'all, because my tomato seedlings, I want to say a week after I planted them, they died. They literally died, and they look so terrible, y'all. I mean, RIP to those original tomato seedlings. I had to go back to the nursery, get new starts, and it wasn't a big deal in terms of money because those three seedlings only cost me like $11. So at the end of the day, I didn't waste a lot of money, but I don't know. I was just kind of sad because I was like, what are the odds that I plant these seedlings and then we have this unseasonable weather pattern where it's never 40 degrees, like on March 24th? And finally, mistake number 8 is not using neem oil to control pests. And when I say not using neem oil to control pests, I mean like as soon as possible. Literally, I grew a couple watermelon sprouts and I was so excited, y'all. I mean, these were the only sprouts that survived the cold snap, and I had given them names. That's just how into it I was. That's how connected to the journey I was. That was how proud I was that these plants had actually survived 7 weeks of intense rain and 40-degree weather. So, the crazy thing is they couldn't have been more than like an inch high, maybe a half of an inch high out of the soil. I come back the next morning, one of the plants does not exist anymore. When I say does not exist, I mean it is not in the garden bed. In my head, I'm like, am I crazy? I know just yesterday I came out and there was a sprout that existed here. But what happened, y'all, is a worm ate it. I cannot believe I did not think of this, but pest control starts as soon as the sprout comes out of the ground. And I just didn't think of it. It escaped me. Make sure that as soon as your sprouts come out of the ground, you treat them with some neem oil. I mean, you do not want to come back after being excited and seeing a sprout come out of the ground to just having it disappear into nothingness. So I would definitely recommend pest control early, early as soon as possible.